Do you like history? Of course I like history. Do you like underrated and important people in history? Have you not noticed my dark academia look? I was going for Pinterest librarian. Do you want to know more about LGBTQ plus history? Well, duh, I'm clearly queer. No. Don't throw that rainbow glitter at me. We'll never get her out the carpet. Okay, fine, you're making a good point. How about a montage instead? What is happening right now? We're adding another installment to my historical profile series, looking at the interesting queer and or disabled people from history who we didn't get to learn about in school. Unless you're currently being shown this by your teacher, in which case, which school did you go to? You lucked out. Today we're talking about the first openly gay talk show host on national television, the first drag star to be inducted into the Hollywood Walk of Fame, an international model who also works to raise awareness of HIV/AIDS, a best-selling author, Tony Award winner, Emmy Award winner. Wait, didn't he do a fracking? Okay, shh, don't question mother. But also yes, we'll get into that. And the Drag Race transphobia controversy. You really do want me to put this rainbow glitter away? Yes, we'll get into that too. You should probably also point out that this video is sponsored by Surfshark. RuPaul is also a Scorpio. That's just some extra info for you. RuPaul Andre Charles, born November 17th, 1960, and styled as just RuPaul, which apparently is an homage to his Louisiana parents' Creole roots, since a roux is the base of a gumbo, is the most commercially successful drag queen in the world. The worlds in and around drag have certainly changed a lot since Ru started performing in the 60s, Jesus, calm down. Didn't start performing as a toddler. The 80s. Ru started performing in the 80s. How much of that is down to RuPaul himself? And is all of his impact positive? Side note, but we call our toddler Ru for Rupert, but with 2 O's, and it mentally trips me up constantly when reading or writing about RuPaul. RuPaul and drag. First of all, a little recap on what drag is, for those who may need a refresher. Drag, with the meaning of female clothes worn by a man, has been used from at least the 1870s. There is a theory that the term comes from the way a gown drags on the floor when it's worn on stage by an actor, though according to the Smithsonian magazine, it may also come from Grand Rag. The first known person to call himself a queen of drag was William Dorsey Swann, a former slave in the 1880s. Modern drag has had a vibrant history throughout the 20th and 21st century, with great booms of interest like the 1920s and the present day, and moments of oppression like the 1940s and the present day. Don't worry, we're not going to do a full history of drag. That we would be here all week. Turns out people have been playing with gender presentation since people started wearing clothes. Well, pretty clothes are fun, what can I say? We tend to think of drag queens as cis gay men who play female characters, but this is in part due to the effect of earlier seasons of Drag Race. While some drag queens live their lives as men outside of their drag persona, people of any gender can be drag queens. Drag kings, who wear men's clothing and perform stylized forms of masculinity, are less common but do exist. Many drag kings are women, but people of any gender can be drag kings as well. Because RuPaul's character has the same name as his out of drag persona, I will be using both he and she when I'm talking about RuPaul, because that is what RuPaul does when talking about himself and herself. But RuPaul does actually also have a drag persona who is very different from his personal self. Yes, RuPaul has described his public drag persona as 2 parts Cher, 3 parts Diana Ross, a dash of Dolly Parton, and a little bit of David Bowie and James Brown, and a smattering of Bugs Bunny. Iconic. Alright, let's dive in. RuPaul's story. According to RuPaul's autobiography, Letting It All Hang Out, the day he was born, his mum declared he was going to be famous because no other alive had a name like that. I have actually removed a non-insignificant amount of Emmerdethers from quotes in this video. I need that monetization because building a family as queer people is expensive. I mean, I guess I could say Mother Tuckers instead. Pause to check if that's monetizable. It is! Carry on. But if you've ever found yourself falling down the rabbit hole of Drag Race and gobbling up episodes until you're wishing you could watch every season around the world, you might have discovered that you can't. What? Well, never fear, my dear. That's why you need the sponsor of today's show, Surfshark VPN. What's a VPN? It's a virtual private network that's a service that protects your internet connection and privacy online by creating an encrypted tunnel for your data. VPNs both protect your identity online and allow you to access location-specific services, which isn't to say that the excellent app and browser extension that is Surfshark, did you know it even works on smart TV, only meets your entertainment needs. By shielding your identity from websites, apps and services that want to track you, you can access public Wi-Fi safely and securely without risking your online activity being monitored. You can can even use Surfshark across an unlimited number of devices. Don't act like you only have one. Secure your privacy with Surfshark. Enter coupon code Jessica for an extra 4 months free at surfshark.deal/Jessica. Fairly young in life, he moved to Atlanta with his sister and brother-in-law, where he attended performing arts school and started getting involved in the local music scene and in television. This is where he also saw a drag queen perform for the first time, which was Crystal Lebea in 1978, one of the legendary founders of House Lebea and the house system, which is a thing in itself. Drag queens have houses, they make their own families, in a sense. And in his own words, as his drag-ucation took off, his academic career nosedived, and he dropped out of school at around 17. Obligatory stay in school, kids! If you are actually watching this in a classroom. From childhood, I always felt very unique, yet I could sense that to most people, I was invisible. They didn't know which box to put me in, so I think it was easier to just see past me. Back then, in gay male culture, if you didn't fit into any of the porn-informed stereotypes, you were seen as a eunuch whose sole purpose was to serve as an accessory. It wasn't until I got into drag for the first time that people really started to take notice. That first time and every time since, it felt like Clark Kent turning into Superman. He worked in the local scene for a couple of years, performing music, doing low-budget films and writing, but soon he moved to New York, where he started performing as a go-go dancer at the Pyramid Club. This was an old Polish bar that hosted the first acts in New York of Nirvana and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Artists like Madonna and Andy Warhol hung around. It was a very cool place to be, okay. It was the centre of the drag explosion during the 1990s. A bunch of twisted queens pumping this sick look, all crammed up on this tiny bar, working a room that was no bigger than your average living room, and no taller than us either. Most of us bigger gals had to duck the entire time, or get a sprinkler stuck in our wig. A lot of us thought we could work on that bar forever. The media was, at that time, gaining a new interest in drag. The documentary Paris is Burning, which documented New York's ball culture, came out in 1991. In 1995, there was also Wigstock, the movie, a documentary on the annual drag festival in the East Village in New York. This one actually prominently featured RuPaul and his friends, like the drag queen Lady Bunny, and yes, has an excellent title. There was also a slight uptick in drag fiction movies, like The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, in 1994, and To Wu Fong, Thanks for Everything, Julia Newmark, in 1995. There were some others, but those two titles are long enough to list by themselves. RuPaul said in an interview on the Arsenio Hall show in 1993, and other people are of the same opinion, that there was just a massive swing in public opinion in the opposite direction after the repression of the Reagan era of the 1980s, and as a response to the bleakness of the AIDS epidemic. People wanted colour and fantasy. Even though drag was not as popular as it would become thanks to the show, RuPaul was becoming a recognisable face. He even worked with MAC Cosmetics, creating a shade-inclusive line, part of the proceeds of which then went to fund HIV/AIDS charities. RuPaul was an actual model, guys. Still, when in 2009 he produced and hosted the first season of Drag Race, there was still a degree of stigma around drag. Also, pretty much the reason the only brand they could get to work with him was Absolute Vodka. You can watch more about that in my video about alcohol and the LGBTQ+ community. The eventual winner of season 1, Bibi Sahara Benet, actually initially rejected the invitation to participate because she was scared the show would make fun of drag queens instead of celebrating them, as that seemed to be the general trend. That is a far cry from what the New York Magazine has called America's new pastime, loving drag. Victoria Porkchop Parker described having been mocked when she started drag in the 1980s, and even shot at during this season though, so I guess it's just the kind of Americans who read New York Magazine. In that sense, the show served to present the lives and struggles of drag performers with a sense of humour and drama, and to showcase different styles of drag at the same time. Diversity wasn't used the way it is used now, but that was always understood, even back then. It was also about having different kinds of drag: pageant drag, fashion drag, glam drag. This was during the first season, when the show only had 9 queens. There are now 210 in just the main franchise. In many ways, RuPaul's Drag Race queens are like Pokemon. Wait, which one was that? I thought her power pose was a 7. As it has become more established, the show has evolved from merely an introduction to drag for the mainstream to a trendsetter of the drag world. But what has that meant for drag performers, whether they've appeared on Drag Race or not? The title of the show is a play on drag queen and drag racing, and the title sequence and song, Drag Race, both have a drag racing theme. For the first 12 seasons, RuPaul would say, "Gentlemen, start your engines and may the best woman win." However, in the 13th season, it was changed to, "Racers, start your engines and may the best drag queen win." The show follows RuPaul in the search for America's next drag superstar. And absolutely no one owes Tyra Banks any money for anything, ever. Don't you let her tell you otherwise. RuPaul plays the role of host, mentor, and head judge, as contestants are given different challenges each week. Contestants are judged by a panel that includes RuPaul, Fozard, an alternating third main judge of either Carson Kressley, Ross Matthews, or T.S. Madison, and one or more guest judges who critique the participants' progress throughout the competition. Each episode features a so-called maxi challenge that tests competitors' skills in a variety of areas of drag performance. Some episodes also feature a mini challenge, the prize of which is often an advantage or benefit in the upcoming maxi challenge, or cash, a prize that always goes down well. Following the maxi challenge, contestants present themed looks in a runway walk. RuPaul and the panel of judges critique each contestant's performance, deliberate amongst themselves, and announce the week's winner and bottom two. The bottom two queens compete in a lip sync for your life. The winner of the lip sync remains in the competition, and the loser is eliminated. Generally, the winner is the contestant that her judges feel has displayed the most charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. Work that one out yourself. The final contestants remaining compete in a special finale episode, wherein the season's winner is crowned. RuPaul's Drag Race has spanned 16 seasons and inspired the spin-off shows RuPaul's Drag U, RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars, and RuPaul's Secret Celebrity Drag Race. The companion series, RuPaul's Drag Race Untucked, which, let's be honest, sometimes is actually required viewing in order to understand the drama in the main show. And there are others as well. Online, offline, there are podcasts, and there are numerous international franchises, including British and Australian and New Zealand, and versions hosted by RuPaul, as well as Chilean, Thai, Canadian, Dutch, Spanish, Italian, French, Philippine, Belgian, Swedish, Mexican, Brazilian, and German editions, and international versus the world competitions hosted in the United Kingdom and Canada. Tyra Banks, who? We don't know her. The problem with the mainstream. There were other platforms for drag in the form of drag beauty pageants that started in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, like Miss Gay America, Miss Continental, and National Entertainer of the Year. But modern ball culture started in many ways as a response to the racism in that pageant circle, with the creation of the house system. Even though there are also nods to other kinds of drag, the structure of the show is very influenced by New York balls, with runways and categories. RuPaul's Drag Race has popularized a lot of vocabulary when it comes specifically from ballroom culture, such as fierce, spilling tea, gagging, shade, or expressions of support like work and "Yas, Queen." Can you imagine a world where random people on the internet and on TV don't say, "Yas, Queen"? I've already briefly talked about balls and the internet appropriating language from Black American queer communities in a previous video, but let's just say that there is a tendency to forget where these words and ideas come from. And this is not limited to the cis-straight fans. In the words of Leomi Maldonado, the Wonder Woman of Vogue, the ballroom scene is a part of the LGBTQ community, but not everyone who's part of the LGBTQ community is aware of the ballroom scene, or have walked the paths of the ballroom scene. They don't understand the culture of ballroom and how deep and important it is to us. When I address certain Drag Race contestants or fans about the proper usage of Vogue and ballroom terminology, it's gotten to a point where they get upset and offended because they're being corrected, which to me is a slap in the face, because you're appropriating. They think that it's all the same thing, but it's not, and they should be respectful. The expectations of many members of the audience when they encounter drag in the real world have also become defined by the things they see in Drag Race, such as lip syncs or celebrity impersonations. In the words of Amru Al-Khaidi, British drag queen and author of Unicorn, the memoir of a Muslim drag queen, the show has also left mainstream audiences with narrow expectations of what a drag queen should do. We do get a lot of straight audiences at our show who expect the one thing because of the show and actually get something quite different. Of course, it is fine that RuPaul's Drag Race cannot represent the totality of drag or ballroom culture. Both drag and ballroom culture have rich histories that can't just be represented by one person. The issue is assuming that person does represent all of it. A reality TV show can only be one window into some aspects of a much wider culture, a culture the show is ultimately riffing off. Also off the movie Paris is Burning. I don't think anyone's actually asking the Kardashians about the Armenian American experience. The intersectional issues of the show. The problem isn't just on the part of RuPaul's Drag Race here. There's also an issue with the audience. In 2021, 1.3 million people watched the first episode of season 13 in the US alone, and that number was apparently outperformed by season 15's first episode. There are at this point 4 spin-offs and 12 international editions. That's a lot of drag racing. It's difficult to account for how much people watching the show will know about particular issues, because they come from a whole rainbow of different backgrounds, and how much the general audience are actually invested in the online culture around the show. Are they following all of the Queen's individual Instagram accounts? Are they picking up on those spicy subtweets from previous cast members? Did they see that pink news headline about someone having paused their transition to go on the show? Does their support continue when that Queen isn't making them laugh every week, but instead is getting harassed in person and online? Shannon Keating for BuzzFeed News wrote in her 2021 article, "Drag Race was a drag for a while, now it's better than ever." The show's subversive, irreverent beginnings briefly turned comfortably mainstream, humdum and derivative prior to season 13's release. She recalls that a flurry of political disputes as well as overexposure threatened to ruin Drag Race's legacy before a refreshed 2021 season. Writers at the Daily Beast agreed, with one, Coleman Spline, noting that although Drag Race is a critical part of bringing empowering and inclusivity to the forefront of mainstream culture, RuPaul has continually allowed the legacy of his subversive landmark reality show to be slowly chipped away at, and that it's heavily complicit in the increasingly capitalised nature of pride celebrations around the world. And some issues have been cropping up over the years that have been good opportunities to talk about representation, but also about the dangers of getting all of your knowledge of a whole community from just one place. RuPaul has been accused of not taking seriously the racism faced by some of the contestants and of fostering the kind of environment that reinforces the racism of the fans. I know, I am aware, and RuPaul is, in her own words, a big old black man. Just hear me out. In season 10, for instance, RuPaul was criticised for the way in which he reacted to Queen the Vixen when she complained about how she'd been treated during the show by other contestants. RuPaul was criticised for being harsher and less supportive than she was of the white contestants, also involved in the season drama, accusing the Vixen of taking the bait when she was taunted, and the Vixen eventually stormed out of the set. You may be thinking, that is not racist. Or you may be thinking, well, RuPaul gets to like some contestants more than others, regardless of race. You might even be thinking, well, perhaps RuPaul's just an older person, relating and feels, honey, I had to put up with this too. You need a thicker skin. Or possibly, drag queens are known for being mean. This is pretty normal and not in any way related to race. But whilst I'm not an expert on race relations, as a disabled lesbian in a mixed heritage family, I'm no stranger to having to explain why a seemingly harmless interaction is bad, actually. Microaggressions are often an exhausting thing to describe and can be perpetuated by people who also fall into the same group. They are the kind of thing that emerges as a pattern. Other people with similar experiences of the world may recognise them or may understand when something happens frequently enough that it is clearly not a coincidence. But often when you try to explain them to people who are not familiar with the kinds of nasty things you have to confront, very commonly you will hear, I'm sure they didn't mean it that way. I'm sure you're just imagining it. I didn't see anything wrong. You're overreacting. They love you really. Which then either makes you try to defend yourself and explain why you are upset, or just makes you wonder, did it really happen? I know this is a common experience I have, but I have no definite proof. Am I actually imagining it? Am I being difficult? Am I the problem? But structural racism is not about individual people being racist. Though people can be intentionally, and some very blatantly are, structural racism is about how one's experience of the world is made harder by thoughtlessness and stereotyping in ways that add up. Or how there is a stereotype of female-coded black people, and they must therefore learn to not ever play into this or ever react to any bullying ever, and instead just be very strong and take it. Like how black Americans are systematically undertreated for pain because some doctors still believe they can't feel as much pain as white people. I'm sure those doctors don't consciously think they're being racist, they just think black people can't feel pain, which is racist. RuPaul has tweeted in the past that racism has nothing to do with race, it's the ego's way of making you feel better than, which I'm sure is true for individual racists who are just insecure and need to find someone to hate for whatever reason. But that really dismisses the structural reasons why they've picked someone of a different race to bully and why people complain about racism. The problem with race in Drag Race is in part that RuPaul is very legitimately a marketing genius, a marketing mother-chucking genius. No, sorry, that didn't sit right. Okay, look, at the international multi-million drag empire he has created, look at the mainstream popularity of drag queens in television and media. If he has his finger on the pulse of what the fan community finds enjoyable, and the fan community is more likely to support thin, white, normatively attractive drag queens, it makes sense that the show and he himself are going to be part of the problem. Not because he personally thinks that people of colour are in any way inferior, but because his job is to promote what sells. But I think we can make the argument that when you control the narrative, when you control what is shown and what is vocally called out as being beautiful or being the best, could you not work to change the audience's perception of what is marketable? This does not only apply to race. For instance, after criticisms from the trans community in 2014, the show removed the sound bit "you've got she-male" and changed it to "she already done had hers." Some LGBTQ+ people actually find comfort in the making fun of slurs or homophobic attacks when they are with their friends, because they know there's an understanding that the joke is the absurdity of homophobia or how unoriginal those attacks tend to be. But even in the LGBTQ+ community, a lot of trans people are not going to be happy when a cis gay man starts using trans slurs. Much like the case of ball culture, the show brings a vocabulary to a mainstream audience who may think these are okay statements to make because they're coming from a trusted queer source, or that it's language which can become part of anyone's everyday lexicon. Lance Bass from NSYNC wrote an apology for using a slur for trans people in 2012. Oh, that is not something I had on my bingo card. And he said, "I can tell you with all sincerity that I had no idea. I often hear the term used on logos RuPaul's Drag Race and spent an entire summer listening to Christian Siriano use the phrase hot tea mess on Lifetime's Project Runway. In my definition, I was referring to the flamboyant and hilarious drag queens and transvestites who play on Christopher Street in New York City, some of whom I even call friends." There are limitations to how much RuPaul's Drag Race can be expected to be an educational source and to get it right every time. So, just make sure that when you use terms for a particular community, you know where they are coming from and what that community thinks of them. Some members of the fan community can also be very judgmental of the bodies of the queens, and even in the show, some of the jokes made could be accused of promoting fatphobia. At the same time, RuPaul's Drag Race may well be the first mainstream show where many people have heard a bigger person be called beautiful, with no sense of irony, which definitely should not be the case. The representation is a bit of a double-edged sword that way. We need more representation for larger bodies, but then we also need them to not be made fun of in every comedy challenge. Thanks. And some of the philosophy and morals of the show are extremely positive in the right context. In his book, Guru, which is, as every Ru-based pun, a delightful title, RuPaul talks of how leaving behind a victim mentality has been a fundamental part of his growth as a person, and in many ways what has saved his life. RuPaul talks about some really powerful things here, like how you have to give yourself permission to be loved, how staying in dark places can get in the way of loving yourself or treating your body with respect and care, and how sometimes you need to reach out to those who want to love and help you and just ask for help. Now, this is a message that is an important part of what RuPaul's Drag Race stands for. This message of love and self-acceptance, or rather self-celebration, as a response to being considered strange or to being mistreated, is something worth putting out in the world. Season 14 winner Willow Pill suffers from cystinosis, a degenerative disease originating in the kidneys that also affects other parts of their body, such as hands and feet muscles, brain and throat. During the show, she joked about her condition and she shared parts of her life, like how she does her makeup while dealing with the difficulty gripping with her fingers, and how she's had to learn to compensate for the parts of her body that won't respond as well. A sewing challenge would be my worst nightmare too, so she's certainly an impressive queen. RuPaul replied that she doesn't see her as the victim, and that while other people would succumb to such a disease, Willow Pill rose above it. These are just like, just not good things to tell someone with a chronic illness, really. No. Explaining my symptoms and how I live with them or mitigate them is not succumbing to my disease. None of us are actually doing that, you know. I mean, we're still here, still going. Is it a wonderful thing that Willow Pill was given the platform to describe how she does drag? She's actually the second queen with a chronic illness to win the show after her drag mother, Evie Oddly. Oh, spoilers for Drag Race, sorry. And in the same season we also have Dea Betty explaining how she has to make her outfits in ways that hide her insulin pump. Also I should explain, but I probably should have explained at the top of this whole video, that I learned drag queens' names through reading subtitles on Drag Race, so I miss a lot of the jokes in the pronunciation of their names. Sorry about that. And earlier, Jinx Monsoon dispelled myths about how narcolepsy worked in season 5. Okay, wait, no, I guess that is 3 queens with chronic illness who've won Drag Race. I can't believe the Drag Race wiki article about Willow Pill would lie to me. But the show is, at the end of the day, television, and that means that often the queens need to have a narrative arc. And it's hard to deal with the adjustments that someone has to make in their everyday life in a way that is narratively satisfactory, because there is no end point to chronic illness, it just keeps being there. And when you try to write someone who is trying to give visibility to their condition with an overcoming narrative, it's very easy to fall into inspiration porn. Maybe what I like about you is you've never used your chronic illness as an excuse is not the best thing to tell someone who just told you their body is shutting down. Having a chronic illness is actually a pretty acceptable excuse to need accommodations. To be fair, it wasn't Rue who said that, it was Michelle. A moment of silence while we give the stink eye to Michelle. It is great to have these queens being cast and their stories being told on television, and Rue is obviously part of that as a producer, even if it is for the sob story narrative. It is also clear that RuPaul can learn from his mistakes and is willing to change his position on controversial topics. And it's also very evident that when he does this can have a positive effect in the drag community and in the queer community more generally. Like RuPaul's position on trans issues. RuPaul loves sharing his thoughts on Twitter, in books, in interviews, and that means we've actually seen his position on the matter evolve in real time over the years. In 2016, when asked about the relationship between drag and the trans community, he said, "We mock identity. They, the trans community, take identity very seriously." So it's the complete opposite end of the scale. To a layperson, it seems very similar, but it's really not. And listen, I understand being frustrated with people's confusing drag performers and trans people. It is often a common misconception that conflation is a harmful stereotype for the trans community. And I guess, as a drag performer, you might feel annoyed if you put hours and hours into looking like a beautiful woman, only for someone to say, "Well, aren't you a woman anyway?" No, that's the point. Especially if you're a cis male queen, like the transformation is the whole part of the whole thing that you were going for there. But actually, trans people have a long history of being involved in drag. The first drag queen RuPaul says he watched perform in 1978, Crystal LeBea, was a trans woman. So I don't know if that's a very fair take. But RuPaul has actually been open to criticism on this front, and the show has evolved in kind. In Rue's words in a tweet in 2018, "Each morning I pray to set aside everything I think I know, so I may have an open mind and a new experience. I understand and regret the hurt I have caused. The trans community are heroes of our shared LGBTQ movement. You are my teachers." Even though in the past RuPaul said he wouldn't let a trans woman take part in the show after she had started medically transitioning, there have now been trans women, non-binary people, a cis woman, a trans man, and even, gasp, a straight man competing in RuPaul's Drag Race. And his opinion and what the show considers acceptable are actually very important for a lot of people who work in the world of drag. In a 2023 interview, All-Star Season 4 contestant and trans woman Farrah Moan said, "The times in my life where I tried to suppress my trans identity, it was because I felt if I ever did it, I would never be able to be on Drag Race, I'd never be successful, and I'd never be able to have a job." Even though the rules of the show are still fairly strict, and these are relatively slow changes, RuPaul's Drag Race is opening to a more positive and playful perspective on who gets to do drag. The aforementioned Willow Pill was actually one of 5 transgender contestants of season 14. Season 15 featured the first openly trans winner, Sasha Colby, and other recent seasons have had a spectrum of trans, non-binary, gender fluid, genderqueer, and gender non-conforming folks. Because if drag is about a hyper-stylized performance of gender, there is no reason why a woman can't also play that game. Well, if Nicolas Cage can play a parody of Nicolas Cage, why can't a woman play a parody of a stylized version of a woman? Yeah, okay, let's bring him into this. There is no reason why anyone of any gender can't play around with what gender looks like. People are still holding on for the introduction of drag kings in the show, though, because surely no one thinks masculinity can't be as silly as femininity. Right? I mean, look at Nicolas Cage. Do I think these issues mean RuPaul's Drag Race is bad? No, it's important we can be critical of the issues that emerge in our communities, even if we come from a place of love, particularly if we come from a place of love. So we can make sure that people who participate in public life and entertainment are not exploited and can express their concerns and issues safely. And it's important that we do not try to support the platforms of performers that do not have great financial backing. However, I do think we can all agree it's actually also very positive that we have something like RuPaul's Drag Race in the public eye. The US Congress is trying to ban the LGBTQ+ flag from being flown over US embassies. 75 anti-LGBT bills have become law in 2023 in the United States, and several drag bans were passed last year that are in different stages of implementation. I live in the UK, and our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says transphobic things occasionally because he wants to be best friends with J.K. Rowling? Unclear. Questions like, how can we make drag more inclusive? Or, what issues do drag performers face? Can only be asked because we are comfortable enough that asking these questions is not going to destroy Drag Race as an institution. Oh, you know, it's like how you can moan about your family, but no one else is allowed to. It is still massively important that general audiences get to see drag queens, not just as fellow humans, but as the incredible performers that they can admire, and for drag queens to be able to speak up about issues in the LGBT community from a much more public and also personal position. As Raven, second season contestant and our creative producer on the show, said, there are people now who understand it's not this weird, creepy thing that guys do for sexual pleasure, but you don't have to get on drag and be on stage. You can get in drag and go try and make money at being a model. You can be someone who's a host at a party or run the bingo or something else. It's an art form now with a lot of possibilities. At the end of the day, RuPaul is just one person who has played a major role in bringing drag to a position where it's recognised, respected and celebrated in ways it's never been before. And that is not nothing. And he gets to have some issues to work through. He gets to not be perfect. Frankly, given the history of criminalisation and the stigma of the LGBT community, it's actually a good thing that the queer world has a mainstream at all, that we can criticise from a place of love, because we're all born naked, and the rest is drag. What about the fracking? Oh, yeah, right, okay. Did you know that RuPaul has a husband? Yeah, I know. I did not know that too. George LeBar. They've been married since 2017, but they're pretty private about it. His husband owns a large ranch in Wyoming that they use as a vacation home, and some land on it is leased to oil companies who frack. Fracking is a controversial method of extracting oil and gas trapped in rock formations. Wyoming is arid and the process uses an immense amount of water. The resulting fossil fuels also contribute to the climate crisis. However, RuPaul and his husband probably have no say over whether fracking occurs on their property because the rights to minerals under a given piece of land, including fossil fuels, are owned separately from the surface rights. So I guess he could just not own the land. But he technically isn't fracking himself. That's not a defence. I'm not defending him. I'm just saying. Although I do feel like the next season of Drag Race should open with shirtless pit crew digging for oil and somehow getting slathered in it. Things I did not expect to be talking about in 2024. We can all make choices. Sell the land. Subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you for supporting the channel by clicking the link to surfshark.deals/Jessica in the description below, or scanning the QR code on my screen. That's what that is. Supporting my sponsors supports me. You can use promo code Jessica for 4 months extra for free. Don't be involved in fracking, kids.